So, hello and welcome to this sixth in the series of Communicating in a Crisis and Beyond. We are on week 6 of the 12 series, and this week we're focusing on email marketing from setup to send, and I have a guest, Mark Costa, who I'll introduce you to in a minute. As with all the other ones in the series, we will be talking about marketing generally, but with a focus. So we'll be trying to make it relevant. Subjects in the past have included how to change how you communicate at this time. That was the first one, really, was changing to more brand building exercises rather than promotional, and you'll see that that is reiterated in this particular episode. Then we've moved into subjects which are more around setting up some fundamental structures that maybe you always should have done, like your personas, consistent branding and stuff like that. And I think this subject in particular is something that people have wanted to do for a while, have meant to do, or have wanted to revisit. So that's the reason why email marketing is a really good one to focus on. So thank you very much for filling out the poll. What we've seen is that there's a variety of experiences with email marketing. Some of you regularly do email marketing, some inconsistently, and some would like to revisit the strategy. So we've only got one person who hasn't got any experience at all. Thankfully, we've also got the majority of people using Mailchimp, which is helpful because today's software of choice will be Mailchimp. However, the things that we're going to talk about will be relevant even if you decided to either move away from Mailchimp or to use a different platform. I've also seen that the greatest challenge, with 50% of people are saying, creating the content and knowing what to say. Now, funnily enough, we do have a copywriter on the call, Natalie, who might be able to give some direction in the future, and I know that Natalie does workshops on this as well. So it's also knowing where to start, which we are going to talk about, and consistency. So we'll make sure that we touch on these subjects. One of you said other. I'd be really interested to know what that is if you want to add it in the chat. So thank you very much for filling out that poll. The structure and timing for today, we have up to 11 o'clock, but normally the presentation and conversation with our guest is around 45 minutes, and then we have a Q&A section. This varies depending on when we naturally come to a pause. The Q&A is not recorded or posted on YouTube. That is because I think that you should be able to ask things without worries about it being on the internet forever, so you've got privacy, but also because I think you should only benefit from a Q&A if you turn up to the live recording. So that's just me. Email marketing, the structure will include where email marketing comes as part of your, what part email marketing forms as part of your overall marketing strategy, and also what the purpose of email marketing is, so we really understand what we're trying to do. Then we'll talk about GDPR and handling data. 2017 was a big year for GDPR, and it was a bit of a crisis time for a lot of people, but we've got it handled and we're just going to go over it again. Optimizing of your Mailchimp accounts. There are some settings in Mailchimp which really help you to make the most of it, so I'll quickly go over that. And then organizing your audience, understanding the difference between groups, segments and tags. Then the design of your email. Our guest is a particular expert in this area, but we'll also talk about frequency, subject lines, and all the other elements that are important, and then getting sign-ups. As I mentioned, we'll then move on to a Q&A. You will get an email afterwards that will tell you when the video is live on YouTube, but you can also sign up for the rest of the series via idealmarketingcompany.co.uk/crisis-communications. So, welcome, Mark. Thank you very much for joining me today. I particularly wanted to get Mark involved because not only have I known him to be a very supportive business leader in the local community, his designs have always impressed me as well. I know that email marketing is a subject that Mark has spoken about quite a few times whenever we've been at networking. So thank you for coming along, Mark.
No problem. So I'm getting updates at the same time, so apologies for any being.
No, it's all right. As well as doing email marketing templates in Mailchimp, Mark also does logos and branding, websites, magazines, news. What you can see, read all that yourself. But yeah, he's a really trusted designer in our local community.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting me on.
So the first thing we really want to talk about, and Mark's going to chip in at different points. I think it's helpful to have another expert in here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what the purpose of email marketing really is. we've talked about it in other parts of the series that really you want to be moving to brand building communications at this time. But email marketing is always really about that. I know that Mark, you've said really use the words educate, inform, and for fun. Is there anything that any kind of examples that you have of that from?
Yeah, I just think it's just trying to, obviously if you're in a certain e-commerce type business and some of that, you might be doing more sales type emails. But I think generally, we imagine how many emails we all get, and you've got to attract people's attention. And I think, constantly selling is not going to do that. So it's about building the brand and demonstrating who you are, not just visually, but also your ethics and what you do. And if you can educate people to understand what it is that they can do for themselves, so these like the things that you're doing now, the videos, and understand what you as an expert can do for them on top of that, that's good as well. As an example, what I had with one of my best performing emails was one I toyed with a little bit of whether to put it on there at all. It was for one of my tools and apps emails, and it was a thing called Parkopedia, which is a sort of Google for car parks. And I thought, well, how do I sort of shoehorn this into a business-related thing? But I sort of suggested, if you're going to some, when we're not in lockdown, going to some new city to meet somebody and you're not sure where the parking is, this is a really useful tool to save you a lot of driving about. And actually, that got a huge open rate, a huge click-through rate, because just people found it interesting. And a similarly one I did on maps, which was just something for fun. It was just a thing that showed how different countries are distorted by the way that we do mapping. It was an interactive website, and that as well. So I think it's easy to get lost into, we must stick to selling, we must stick to talking about ourselves and our business. And something I say quite a lot, and I think we've spoken about this before, is that marketing generally, I think, assume nobody cares. If you assume that everyone's really interested in everything you're saying, then you're going to promote too much. You're going to talk about what you do and who you are and where you've been. If you assume that you've got to grab their attention with something interesting, then it's about them. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, and I think as with everything else that we've, this is bringing quite neatly into the stuff that's at the bottom. I'll make sure I go through the whole slide. But if somebody is considering email marketing, then really the focus has to be on their personas and understanding people that are talking to and what they care about. So there's that balance. I think, like you say, with e-commerce, I'll work through. So maintenance and brand building, educate, inform, or share things that are fun and interesting, because they're easier to absorb in most cases. And
more memorable as well. That's the thing. People remember you because of it.
Yeah, for being helpful. And I suppose we've talked about it before, where Mark, your brand obviously is around design, but it's also around being very helpful and very supportive. So to share a tool that you found to be really helpful is completely on brand for who you are as a person. So that can be a really interesting thing to think about. What would support, if you are a solopreneur, if you're self-employed, if you're in the service industry, then not just doesn't necessarily have to be around your service. I love spreadsheets, for example. So if there's a way to analyze something, or if I can create a tool that's going to be helpful, it's not necessarily about marketing. It could be around your marketing analytics, but most of one of my catchphrases or my strong beliefs is that not many problems can't be solved with a good spreadsheet, aside from COVID-19, obviously. So
they might be doing that as well.
There will be some where people are trying to figure it out. So it's really around increasing retention, referrals, return custom, and then conversions, because I couldn't think of another word that used R at the beginning. But building the know, like, and trust. This is know, like, and trust is what salespeople normally refer to. This is what you build up before someone's likely to buy from you. And if you think about what helps people to know me, to like me, to trust me, it may not only be what you do sell, it's everything else that makes them think, okay, well, I get that person and I want to do business with them. Marketing has the potential to create those pre-qualified leads, and particularly at the moment, you've got this whole time period where you can be building up the KLT, you can be building up that know, like and trust, so that when people do start buying again, you get a larger share of that pound, but also that they're more likely to trust you more quickly. So it's going to be less of an uphill battle. You can also keep your audience thinking of you. Say somebody buys from you once, if you can continue to provide value, then when it comes again, or when the next opportunity is, they will still be keeping you in mind, keeps you fresh, and then continues to build on that original conversation they might have had with you. Any promotions, as you say, are secondary unless your audience has signed up for promotions. So, for example, what you could be doing is that the main subject and the information that you provide is free, and at the bottom you could have a thing that you do sell and people can buy, so that it's there, but it's not the point of the email. Now, with e-commerce, as you quite rightly said, Mark, people can sign up for promotional emails, and we're going to talk about actually how to organize your audience so that you can target people based on what they want to hear. So that's quite right. So if you're thinking,
absolutely. If you want to keep your open rates and your click-through rates healthy, then you've got to let them select the content, or you select the content for them based on what their needs are. Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing is, with Mailchimp and with most software now, those options are really easy. It's just having a think, really. The first step in that would be, if you are thinking about using email marketing or maybe reinvigorating your email strategy, what does your audience want to hear? Now, personas is something that I've talked about a lot, and I think it's probably the second one in this series where we talk about it with Julie as well, who's a sales expert. So if you're not really sure what they are, go back, but they help you to understand your target market really, really well and what's going on in their head. You can also send out surveys and say depends on what your relationship is like with your clients, but if you say, I'm thinking about doing an email newsletter, this is what I'm thinking about doing, what's your opinion? You can ask directly as well. Fundamentally, you do have to think about, and this will come up when we talk about the design, but can you maintain it? Is it something you need to set things up so that it is easy enough to do? And it might involve a bit of setup at first, which you'd expect, but on a weekly or monthly or whatever basis, you need to know that you can do it easily enough.
Yeah, I would say also on that there's a couple of advantages. If you pursue the traditional route of the email newsletter, and I've never found a better term than newsletter, but it has a negative connotation at times. I think because of that idea that you get this long email with multiple stories, we've done this and this is what we did last month and this is what, all that sort of stuff, that works from certain audiences, but it's not going to work across the board, and they're the sort of things I think that get deleted quickest.
Long ones.
If you're going to, that's a blanket approach, so not everyone is interested in all the stuff in there, and B, you've just put all your content into one email. So if you split that up and break that into 4 emails or 5 emails, and you split the content based on what somebody said they wanted to receive, then that's going to work a lot better.
I think that's it's a very important point. Value is not necessarily giving as much information as humanly possible. Value is actually providing information in a digestible way that's easy to use. So I think that's a really good point. Natalie, probably from Writer for You, probably has a few things to add to that as well. So let's have a look at the next one. So we are going to talk about subject lines and things like that when we talk about the design, so that we are going to get to that. I want to talk about GDPR and handling data for a while, because it's kind of a concern with email marketing. In 2017, when everybody was panicking, although obviously it was a concern for different people that we were trying to support, for us GDPR was brilliant because it legislates for good quality marketing above all else. It forces people to behave in a way that they should be, which is by either making sure that it is in somebody's best interest to be receiving an email from you, or getting explicit consent. So there are 6 legal bases for data processing. The 2 that are usually used for marketing purposes are legitimate interest and explicit consent. Now, legitimate interest is if somebody has interacted with you before, either by asking for sales information or been a customer, and you have gone through the process of thinking, do I have evidence and do I believe that this person's, it is in this person's, it's easy for me to say, in this person's best interest to get this information from me? Do I genuinely think that? The other one is explicit consent, which is obviously better. Part of the reason why it's better is because you also get to ask them what kind of information they'd like, and then you can do that audience and targeting. The acid test for me with any kind of, well, what should I be doing, is how would you feel if you were on the receiving end of an email, of this email you're thinking of sending? So it's not a legal one, but it's okay, if you're going through legitimate interest and you're thinking, oh well I could get away with it, if you're thinking I could get away with it, don't do it, because you will undermine the trust of your audience, the person who spent time with you, and that is damaging to your marketing. So how would you feel if it was done to you, essentially? So those are the things. Now within Mailchimp, you have ways of making sure, several different ways of ensuring that something is in line with, that any sign up is in line with GDPR, and also because they keep a record of when somebody signed up, you have a record if the Information Commissioner's Office ever came after you. One thing that I would recommend, and isn't default, I don't think at the moment, is using a double opt-in for your audience. Although Mailchimp has changed this a few different times, but
I thought it was default currently. I'm not sure if they had, excuse me, if they had themselves. Yeah, I think it's still default. I'm not sure.
I think it, but then it depends on how old your audience is. But I think also, if you're not using Mailchimp, it's worth checking. Double opt-in is essentially, if somebody signs up to an email newsletter, they then get an email with a link that they have to click in order to be signed up, and they are not signed up until they check their inbox and select that link. I have got an experience from when I used to run an e-commerce website where I actually was contacted by the police because somebody was using our email newsletter to bully somebody. And what they'd done was signed this person up for loads of different email newsletters, including weight loss ones and stuff like that. Now, ours was an e-commerce website for redheads, so I imagine this person was ginger, and that was a thing to bully them about. But it was a horrible, and this was years ago. But I then put double opt-in in, and that was only possible because I hadn't had double opt-in on that audience. So they then started to get my emails. So it's good for multiple reasons, but one of them is making sure that it's genuinely them who signed up, and not somebody else, and that they really do want to hear from you. So I'm going to try and whisk through this so that we can really move into the kind of setup and stuff like that. Unless there's, I know that the point at the end is important, but downloads and lead magnets are often used as a way to sign people up for an email newsletter. And this is an important thing to rethink post GDPR, because these are still a valuable way of building up your email marketing list. But I would suggest that instead of automatically adding someone to your email newsletter if they sign up for the download, is at the point of downloading, ask them if they want to be on your email marketing list, because that is possible now. It's going back to this whole acid test of, well, maybe they don't want to hear from you regularly and they just want the download, and that's okay. They might change their mind later on because they think, well, actually this download was well worth it. So include links within your download that if somebody changes their mind and they do actually want to sign up to your email newsletter, and maybe you provided the value or showed the value of the email newsletter via your download, then give that option there. But I think that's a really important thing to think about.
There's something I'd add there actually as well, in that something I'm intending to do for mine when I'm redoing the website is that have something which is a download, like a top tips for logo design, for argument's sake, but actually that would sign them up to a limited series email related to that specific subject. So join our database, join this link, and we'll get you on the email list for this, which will then send you the link to download the top tips. And then if they stay with it, then there'll perhaps be something else related to that comes on the second one. But they know there's only 2 or 3 emails, and that's it. It stops. That third email might just say, "Hope you enjoyed this. Would you like some?" There are subjects we do on our main email, because again, I think I absolutely agree. It comes back to the asset text. How do you feel about it? If you feel you wanted to get something useful, but you've been tricked into something else, then it's not going to work. You've got to feel that you were engaged throughout the whole process, and that you opted in for everything that you've been asked for. So I think that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, but also if we think about the whole purpose of email marketing being a brand building exercise, that completely undermines the whole point.
Yeah.
So when we were talking about this beforehand, Mark, you were really talking about how important it is to have a quality list over having a big one, and that really large lists are vanity. So I think this is something that's important to think about. A lot of people end up cutting down their list massively, and they, weren't very, and that made them feel quite upset. But Mark, you were sharing your story about when you cut down your list.
Yeah, so I had about, I'm trying to think now, about 1,100 people on the list initially. All of them had met networking, all of them had taken their card, and added them onto my database so we could keep in touch, and I'd added them to the email list as well. In hindsight, probably, although that's legitimate interest in some sense, to be on my CRM, my view after once the GDPR started talking about that, I was thinking, you know what, actually they're two different things. So I now, when I ask people, when I take a card from them, I say, are you okay if I add you to my CRM, which I don't actually need to ask them that's legitimate interest anyway, but I do it out of courtesy. And then I say to them, I do a series of emails that are useful subjects. Would you be interested? They just say yes or no at that point. Now I manually add them at this point, but I'm right on their card that they've said that's okay, and I keep that that's the record that I keep. Actually, right. I've been thinking what I will probably do is take my iPad and get them to opt in on the app there and then that takes away that extra stage. I have done that a few times actually.
Reduces your paper trail as well, I suppose.
Yeah, it just keeps it simple then as well. But yeah, so I went through the process about 6 months before, because there's a whole load of last minute stuff at GDPR. I did it about 6-8 months before, and just sent out emails saying, we're going to need you to sign up to this new list, because everyone was on it, was legitimate anyway, but it was just actually, I felt that it was best to just start cleanly. And I had a number of, had a few hundred people connect and join up with the new list. I then, as the time came towards the end, I just sent emails to those people who hadn't signed up and said, I'm going to delete this list on the whatever date it was in April. Let me know if you want to still receive the emails. This is how you do it.
And I think cleaning on a regular basis is a good idea anyway, which we are going to talk about in a bit. But I think the engagement is probably more important. You get better statistics rather than.
Well, I now have a list of about 300 people, I think, of which, because over time you lose subscribers a little bit anyway. That's just natural. But it's about 230 or something like that. I can't remember. But I get open rates between 30 and 40%, and I get click-through rates of between, well, my best was about 15, but normally it's about between sort of 3 and 7%. The average is about 5%, which is way over the averages that you would see for a list of that sort. And I actually get, with things like the Parkopedia and this map one, I actually get people who reply to me, which is unusual in a marketing email.
Yeah. I think there's a few different examples that I'm going to bring up when we talk about the different design, but the subjects, the more casual ones are the ones that I'm more likely to read, but they're still touching on, and they're metaphors a lot of the time. So this is a quick one which you might want to make sure you come back to the recording of. It's optimization of Mailchimp accounts, and it's often left out. There are two main things to make sure that you do. The first one will improve deliverability of your email, and that's verifying your domain name. Because you are sending an email from Mailchimp, it enables them to be able to send it, and it's more likely to be received. So go to account, which is along your top right, then once in their settings, and then you'll see verify your domain is your first choice, and it will take you through different steps. You might need to involve your developer in there, but if it's not already activated, to make sure you do that. Once it's done, it's done. You don't have to do it again. And then there's also connecting your Google Analytics. And the reason why is because you might think, well, there's analytics and reporting already in Mailchimp. All that will do is if somebody does click on a link that's in your email, you will know that there's been a click. If you integrate it with Google Analytics, you will see from within Google Analytics, when you've had click-throughs from emails, which campaign, and then what they then did as a result of that. Not on an individual basis, which would violate privacy, but more okay, well, not only did this particular email lead to 50% more click-throughs, but then they were more likely to convert on my website, depending on what conversion looks to you, or not, but you'll actually find out. For example, you might be looking at Mailchimp and think, right, well, I had like 50% more click-throughs on that campaign. When you look at Google Analytics, you might see that actually they didn't do anything that supports your business. So it really gives you the, we did a Google Analytics, it could have been last week, I'm not sure, all the weeks are merging together, but on a previous one, go and find it. We're talking about vanity versus clarity metrics, and that integration actually gives you clarity that supports your business, not we got more click-throughs on Mailchimp, which is vanity. So in order to do that, I've given a little bit of a guide on, go again to account and settings, and then the integration is Google. Don't look for Google Analytics, it's just Google, and follow the wizard. Once it's done, it's set up. However, on each email, you are going to need to make sure, just to make your life so much easier, it depends on how you create new emails. An awful lot of people replicate a previous one, which is fine, but when you set it up, whether it's adding the name in or the list or whatever, at the very, very bottom, there is settings and tracking, and that's where you can see the code. Now, here's an example of the email that I send out each week after the webinars, and because I've replicated the last campaign, it just says it says week 5, copy 1. Now, I'd want to change that to be week 6, so that if I'm looking in Google Analytics, it makes sense to me, rather than, oh, I wonder which week that is. Or, if I replicated it, if I left that and then replicated it again, it would be all that stuff at the beginning, and then it'd be copy 1 _ copy 2 or something like that. It would be nonsense. So that will just help you to have data that's useful. Have you got anything to add on that one?
No, I don't think so. No, verifying a domain, all that stuff is well worth doing, because I think it does improve your open rates and your.
It's once and done, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
So on to, I think, a slightly confusing part of it, and then we are going to move on to the design of the actual campaign itself. This is organising your audience, and people forget about this, and I need to check on it. Your audience is your list, and really best practice is to try and keep one audience, one list if possible, but group and segment them. And the reason why...
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say the reason why is that if they unsubscribe, then they have unsubscribed from the list. Whereas if you could have them in accidentally in more than one list or audience, and if they unsubscribe, the two aren't connected. Is that what you were going to say?
I was going to say, well, on top of that, also it's simpler to manage generally, and also if you're on a paid account, it keeps your costs down as well, because if you've got somebody in 4 different lists and it's the same email address, they count 4 times. So you can, if you can get it into one audience and segment it and appropriately, that will work much better for you.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think people used to use several lists before groups and segments were built up in the way that they are. So that it's probably if you have got several audiences or lists interchangeable, then that is probably why it's a hangover from previous time when you wanted to provide this function. So what is the difference between a group and a segment, and then how do you use tags? A group means that you can organise organise an audience by interest into subcategories, that's supposed to say. What the benefit of that is that they can select what emails they want to receive from you. For example, you might see Mackenzie, I think, do this, where you can say what area of business you want to hear from. Do you want to hear from things weekly? Do you want to hear from them weekly or daily or monthly? Do you want to have promotional emails or not? The benefit also of that is if they're getting too many emails from you, they can then reduce how many they get without signing it, unsubscribing completely. So they get control of that and they get to decide what they want. With segments, this filters more on characteristics and behaviour. So in particular, you could use this for unsubscribing people and cleaning your database. If people haven't interacted with you, I think, Mark, this might be the function that you use to clean your list a little bit.
Yes, I had one on there where the GDPR process I went through, I was able to identify people who hadn't opened, say, my previous 5 emails. Now, that's obviously the very low engagement rate. So what I did with them was send them the same emails I sent to the other parts of the audience, but I did something in terms of the subject line, which is a bit more in your face, really. Just tried something there different. And I got some more open and click-through rates for that. I don't think, to be fair, because they were so uninvolved with it anyway, that I don't think there became any sign-ups as that. But that sort of self-selects. Then you go, okay, well, they weren't interested. Again, just take them out of it. But yeah, you can absolutely do that. I think the segments is the best ways to look at the segments, is that that's the top level stuff. You can organize your list and send to segments, and those segments can be built from groups or tags or other things. There's all sorts of stuff in there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so when somebody signs up, or that you can move people into groups, but segments you can update and change as things go on. I've just got a notification that my internet connection is unstable. Can everybody still hear me?
Yeah, it did pause on my side. I don't know if that was me or you, but it did pause just for a second.
The notification's gone, so I hope that's okay.
And I think the other thing you're mentioning about the groups is that, yeah, that's how I organize my list. So there are 4 subjects that when they sign up, they can say, yes, I'm interested in the blog or the design tips only or whatever. You give them complete control, you're going to absolutely reduce your unsubscribes, because they're going to, and then if you remind them and give the link is at the bottom each time, you can change your preferences. It works so much better. Interestingly, I have 2 people who've been on my list for a long time and have selected nothing. So they don't get anything. And every 6 months or so, when I do my reminder about what people have signed up to, because you can do that via the segments, what they've targeted, I say to them, you're not receiving the emails. Do you want to unsubscribe? And they remain on my list anyway. They don't unsubscribe. So I don't know if they don't even open that email or what. But yeah, it's very powerful. The segments is very powerful.
Yes, I think it can be very, in particular, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can use it. It really does depend on what's happening with your, how people sign up, whether you have e-commerce, what links you sent to people or whatever. Like you say, there's filters like haven't clicked or have clicked on the last 5 or 3 or 2, have opened but not clicked, have clicked more than 1 link. There's things like that. You can also target specific campaigns. So if somebody has opened a specific campaign, then if the next one that you send is more like it, you can only send to them if you like, or you could send a special offer for the people who did open it, so that people automatically almost end up on an automated series as a result of just interacting with one of the things that you do. You can also use it within your CRM. So if somebody does click on that, then you might then want to do a follow-up call or something like that. That's where I say use, not as. So tags you can either tag someone when they sign up, depending on the sign-up form that they use. You might have loads of different ones, or you can do it as part of your manual management of that list. Tags, you could then, if somebody is tagged as something, you can then use that to create a segment. The kind of tag you might want is signed up because we met them at this workshop or this exhibition or something like that. So it might be the source, it could be the offer that they took part of, it could be whether you feel that they're an influencer, for example. It doesn't just need to be the source. You can have as many tags as you want. This, I think, for the manual management, this would be helpful if you are really using Mailchimp as your CRM system, but also that you have a small enough list that you know the people, so you have kind of an awareness of who they are and why you might want to get in contact with them. Have you got anything to say about that, Mark?
Yeah, I think in simplest terms, tags is something you use to where you define something about them, whereas the groups is more often something that they define about themselves. So, you know, the groups is I'm interested in this content, please send me this. The tags might be like, say, we met them at a certain location, or they might be a certain sector. I mean, they could equally select by sector them as well on because they're an accountant or whatever, but you might select that by a certain thing because of the way that you want to target your emails. And yeah, the automation is really good as well. I only use the automation in a very simple sense, in that anyone who signs up to my list or is signed up because they allow me to do so will get an automated email that just says, welcome to the list, here's what we've signed up for, because it's just that little confirmation that you know, that little bit of initial communication. And the most simple automation and segment that people might be familiar with is that, because Mailchimp does this automatically, is that when you've sent an email, it will ask you if you want to resend to those who didn't open it. Well, that's a segment. And you can do that manually. You can say who didn't open this last email, send them either the same email with a different subject line. Mailchimp now actually says generally send the same email with the same subject line within 48 hours, or you could choose to send them something completely different.
Okay, so then that could be a way to say, are you sure you still want to be honest?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Now we're actually kind of getting to the number of the issues. So these are the emails themselves. All of the rest of the information we're talking about absolutely matters. It's all very important, but really fundamentally, what is your email going to look like? So I have signed up to loads of email newsletters. The ones that I open more frequently are actually probably the plain ones that are probably 7 or so lines. But then there are also some more complicated ones that I'm always get involved with. So what do you have anything that you want to say kind of about the options there? Yeah,
I would give people the option, and normally Mailchimp's form defaults to give them the option to choose. And I don't know if you can just default it to HTML if they don't choose one or the other.
I think there is a default option.
Default. If you don't do anything where the reliance on getting the message across is in your imagery, because if they don't load the images, or they just take the plain text version, you've lost that. So your text content must work on its own, and then have the imagery to support that. Because if you get one where, and I don't think people do it so often now, I must admit, but you get an email and it's basically a load of blank boxes because it's all imagery, that's not going to work. It's not going to be effective for you. So yeah, it just make sure that supports it. That's the key part of it, I think.
And ultimately, it does depend on the content of your email anyway. There's somebody a guy called Jonathan Stark, who I receive his emails, and he talks about value-based pricing. And he emails every day, and it's maybe about 5 to 7 lines. And what he does is it's all about metaphors. So what he does is he draws real-world comparisons to what he sells. And it's kind of really drilling that kind of his message home, and that's all that he does. So there is no benefit to him having images and things like that in his content.
No, and there's no, as with anything, there's no one size fits all either. No. So, you know,
but he does it every day.
Every day would normally sound like, you know, a red flag. You think, oh my God! But if it's every day and it's content that people want to read and they want, then that works. You know, you've got to get that balance right for your audience. You don't want to overburden them with stuff because they'll just unsubscribe. But you know, equally, the suggestion mostly would be don't have a really long email. That said, I get emails from James Clear. Which are brilliant. Which are huge.
But they're brilliant, aren't they?
And if I have the time to sit down and read through it, I will do. I'm not unsubscribing because when I do read them, they are really good.
Yeah, I get one from Avinash Kaushik, who's kind of a data god. He doesn't send them that often, but they are very long. But he has thought them through, and they are well worth kind of read. So I think, you know, it does depend on the content of it, and that's always going to be the important thing. So if you're thinking about your personas and what they'd like to hear from you, you find out, you know, is it going to be something that's very easy to just write a few lines on, or will it need to involve images and tech and videos and stuff like that? For example, the email that I send out after these, I send the text which has a summary of the structure. I put a link which says, here's the link to see the video. Underneath that is a module which Mailchimp provides with the video and a preview. So even though that video module is there, I still have the link to it in the text, and it isn't click here, it is what the actual thing is. So I think what you're saying there about, you know, you have to allow for almost a fallback plan in most situations is a really, really important one. But the kind of modules that Mailchimp has as standard, obviously you've got your text modules, you've got images, you've got videos, you have HTML, code, you know, you have lines and different spacing and things like that, don't you?
For the drag and drop, yeah, all the different sections, yeah, absolutely. And I would, I previously had an email which I designed and got somebody to hard code for me, which I then uploaded into Mailchimp, and the results were okay over a period of time, but it started to decline a little bit, I think. And part of that I thought really was that I switched to using Mailchimp's drag and drop template. It's pretty flexible, especially I would advise paying, if you can, to get more of the templates and you can work with them. But they're very adaptable. But you know that Mailchimp has tested that thing to destruction. So it's not going to trip up any, well, it's minimal chance of it tripping up any spam filters or causing any issues with usability on various screens. You know it's going to be good on mobile, and I think that's something I use now. I tend to stick entirely to theirs. You can ultimately you can design something very flash that you can't create in their system, upload it, and it might look amazing, but if it doesn't deliver to everybody, or if they can't see it clearly on every device, it's not going to work anyway. And ultimately these are only ever a method you know, I think the design and the branding is obviously important, but these are only ever a method generally to get them to do something. Do you want them to pick up the phone? Do you want them to think about your latest book? Do you want them to order something online? Do you want them to visit your website and read the email in the article? It's normally just trying to get somebody to visit or do something.
And if you know, well, primarily it will be brand building anyway. That content that's already there is fine, and it will normally be text, and it will be around that you know, that main thing. So the fact is that with Mailchimp, there's the drag and drop, as you say, which makes it very easy to look very professional. I think this quite nicely fits into branding and having your template set up. Bare minimum, there's kind of lines at the top. What would you say the most important elements?
Bare minimum, get your logo in there, either at the top of the email or at the bottom, or both. You know, but don't dominate it with that. But you know, keep that branding in there. Try to use a font for the body, and you're restricted by the fonts that are effectively available on the recipient's PC. So try and use something that's in keeping with your corporate font if you can't use your corporate font precisely. Keep to your corporate colors for the majority of it. You can always, you know, expand that palette a little bit, but it's ultimately like something where if somebody clicks a link to your website, they've got to, if they're familiar with it, they've got to recognize it's you. You know, it's no point this looking like confusing people, because then they think, oh well, is this genuinely from this person? You know, you've got to make it consistent with what you produce in other areas. So whether that's your roller banner, your website, or any of your leaflets, it's got to have a core to it of the colors and the general look, and try and keep to, my personal view would be to try and keep to imagery which is within a general scope of being quite similar. Not similar, but of a similar feel. You can have something that might be illustrative sometimes. It might be a photograph limit sometimes. But if your general brand is something quite serious, don't suddenly lump in some weird scratchy looking cartoon or something. Or if it's always fun, don't make it into having something that's really somber. You've got to try and get that feel correct in there as well, and get images that get your message across. I'd say avoid cliches if you can, but something that's abstract that gets the message across and gets their interest.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And when you're doing branding work, and you're the branding expert, Mark, so sometimes people, I don't. This is trying not to kind of put words in your mouth, whilst also referring to the branding piece. The fact is, if you're starting from scratch, say, on your brand, and that in the future you're going to be doing email marketing, or you're going to need to do you're going to need to do website and things like that, then there are elements that are worth your designer knowing about, because then you would have the opportunity at that point to put together a library of images, a fallback font that, fair enough, you have your corporate font, but it is agreed that you have a web safe font. And that can all be part of. That's right?
Yeah. I mean, it just basically, everything should be adaptable. You can't predict everything to that degree, but if you start with a sensible point of, say your leaflets have your leaflets, your branding, your printing materials should have a similar feel to them, a consistency anyway. So you should build up a library of the style of imagery at that point, and then do that with your emails, or the other way around. If email is the first thing you do, then just think carefully about what you're doing. If you've got something you've done elsewhere, make sure it matches with that. If you're using this as the first thing that you do, make sure it's something that you can adapt in other ways, or at least it's not too restrictive. But there's no hard and fast rules, but generally consistency. And I would say consistency can be seen as everything has to look exactly the same, and that's not the case. It doesn't. People
with digital marketing.
And other people I've heard, including other designers, I find the brand guidelines really restrictive. It's really boring. It's like, well, it's not. No, they're not there to be restrictive. They're there to give you a framework to then build around, and you've got to have a consistency. So essentially, it's got to look like it's from the same family, from the same company, and everything. If you laid it all out on a table, they've all got to look like, okay, they're not identical, but they're clearly from the same company. They're all related. You sometimes get where you do somebody's email versus their website versus print. You think, well, this is 3 different companies, surely, and that just doesn't help you get that recognition.
No, and if it is, at the end of the day, if the whole point of your email marketing is brand building, and your brand is not recognizable, or it's not recognizable it's from you, again, it's a wasted opportunity. Or especially if it's inconsistent. We did have a brand episode as well, then that's going to create kind of a jarring experience. So even if you have to go back to your original designer, or look at a whole new branding piece where application is very serious. Now, I know we're running low on time, but if we can get through I don't think there's actually that much more after this, but subject lines is an important thing to just make sure that they even open the email.
Yep.
It can actually end up being kind of a subject in a science in and of itself, to make sure it's engaging. Don't use the word, I think, newsletter. We were talking about this a little bit. I know we're talking about email marketing, and newsletters is what church halls send out. So think about really what the value is of what the email that you're sending out, and then give it a name that is relevant to that, and the value that is in the content of the email. Some people ask questions.
Mine are split by 4 subjects, and I don't refer to them as email newsletters. They are single subjects per email. They're normally very short, and they link off to the main article or whatever it is, the blog, whatever. And yes, it's there's a theme that goes with them all as well. The subject lines is easily overlooked, and there is a science. It's difficult. You just got to experiment. But I think the key is if you spend a couple of hours on your design, and then you spend about 5 milliseconds on the subject line, you know, you've got that balance wrong around. You need to spend the time on the design, obviously, but you need to have a bit of thought, consider some subject lines that would get your attention, because ultimately 60, 70, maybe 80% of the people are not going to see your lovely design if they well, they're not in most cases, because open rates are not generally that high. So the subject line is the bit to hook them in if you can do it.
And also, if you can't think of, if you ask yourself the question, why would somebody open this email, in order to figure out what the subject line is, if you can't figure that out, then I question content. So, you know, it might even be one of the first things that you think about before writing the rest of it. Like, what is the benefit to anybody of receiving this? Like I said, Jonathan Stark sends an email pretty much every day. I don't read every one of them, but the ones that I do, it is based on the subject line. So on moving quite easily onto the frequency subject, it really does depend on what would be valuable to your audience, like how frequently they want to hear from you. You could have several. What is going to be possible for you to produce? That does depend on what the email is. If it's 5 lines of text, then that's probably quite easy to do every day. I'd still struggle personally, but you know, that's not my strength. So really think about that, but then be consistent about it and manage expectations. I think it's important when people sign up to be quite clear about how often they will be hearing from you. And this actually moves us on to the sign up. So we're talking about the whole scheme of email marketing at the moment. Make sure that you explain the value and why somebody would want to receive your email. That will mean that it's more likely for people to sign up to your email marketing list. Obviously, give them options where you can. You can place sign-up forms on your website. Obviously, you could also add links to your email signature. You could send emails specifically to contacts and customers when you first meet them with a link. So I know that, Mark, you were talking about taking also to networking and having the iPad. You could also, I take business cards home, scan them in, and then if I send them an email, there's maybe an opportunity there to say, and while you're at it, here's a link in case you are interested in hearing blah blah blah. So that's another probably slightly softer. One thing that I want to make sure that I definitely say is that you need to test the experience of the sign up, because from start to finish, and do it and do it probably every 6 months to see what it's like, because it might be that all of a sudden your sign up form doesn't have your branding there, even though you already have it and can very easily add it because you've used it for your email newsletter. What does the email look like, the double opt-in email look like when it arrives in your inbox? Is the subject consistent? Is the branding consistent? So this could be one of the first experiences that your customers or your contacts have with your brand. Make sure and it doesn't take long to make sure it's okay, but just go through the process to make sure that it's doesn't let you down, I suppose, and manage the expectations. I want to move on to a Q&A now, because we're getting close to 12. But just to let you know that there are others in the series coming up. We're going to talk about PR, finding good news stories and discovering where hidden news stories often are and how to use PR well. We're going to talk about LinkedIn optimization in the future, launching a podcast and customer journeys, and there'll be many more to come. It will continue to be Wednesdays at 11 AM for 12 weeks in total. As I said, this is 6 weeks, so week 6. But do let me know what you want to learn about, if there's a subject that you'd love to know more about, and if there's anybody that you think would be a great guest, like Mark. Thank you very much today.
Thank you.
As I said at the beginning, you can view all the future dates and join the newsletter at idealmarketingcompany.co.uk/crisis-communication.